Our next session is about how journalists can manage to maneuver and work on these issues, which are cross-cutting and of immense interest. Looking at the sheer numbers, in terms of the resources involved, the players, whether from Africa and beyond, the interests of governments, the geopolitics. This is a very interesting area. But it's also happening at a time when our newsrooms and our journalists on the continent need capacity to be able to ask the right questions and also bring out the right stories that inform and also provoke thought. So we have got a very powerful panel of three people who are all players in the media. Some of them are editors and one is a practicing journalist. I will start introducing Fidelis Satriastanti, who is a China Dialogue South East Asia editor. She's based in Jakarta, and as you know, Indonesia ranks highly on the area of critical minerals, and this is an area that she has been covering. So we will be listening to her, sharing us her experiences, and then also we've got Eric. Eric is somebody who has been with keen interest in this topic, and he is a seasoned digital media executive and a leader strategist with the experience in handling very complex editorial operations. And he has done a lot also in the capacity building, coming up with the kind of drawing kind of skills that we can take to our upcoming reporters and those in the newsrooms to be able to cover these topics well. And on the other end is Julia Evans. She works for the Daily Maverick here in Johannesburg, South Africa. Julia has got passion covering environment and energy transition issues. So we look forward to hearing from them. I will start with Fidelis, who is close to me. Fidelis, you are a female journalist who
yes
who has been involved in covering critical mineral in Indonesia.
Yes.
And there are many issues surrounding critical minerals in terms of your own safety, the controversies, and other topics that are of interest to your audience. Probably you could also share with us what it means to cover critical minerals in Indonesia, the challenges involved, and also the positive aspects of it.
Okay. First of all, hi everyone. My name is Fidelis. I'm based in Jakarta, Indonesia. So basically, for critical minerals in Indonesia, they just recently just defined what our critical minerals are. We recently have a list. If you heard about Dr. Nelson's presentation earlier, so Indonesia already had a list of critical minerals, 47. But basically, some of those minerals are already been mined in Indonesia, such as nickel, tin, copper, zinc, I think. They're already on the list. Just a full disclosure, I'm not really into critical minerals, but I do, the last time my field visit was in coal mining site. So probably I can share you about what happened in Indonesia, because what happened was coal is a really huge commodity in Indonesia. And when Justus asked what it means that you can really lose your life of covering that, because the thing with mining in Indonesia is really a very important commodity, important extraction. they have it does have its own law. It's called Coal and Mineral Resources Law, which actually made it clear that everyone who is not in line or obstructing the activities of this mining industries will be penalized or being criminalized. And this is something that is happening a lot in Indonesia, especially in areas such as in Kalimantan and Sulawesi and Sumatra. And not Jakarta. Jakarta is not, we don't have many mines there, but we have a lot of mines in Papua, Kalimantan, Sulawesi, and Sumatra. So that is something that needs to be prepared. When I was going to the field, you have to understand the level of importance of this mining commodity in the country. And the second one is that I have to understand the field in the area, because I was practically a city girl in Jakarta, and then I have to go to, at that time the site was in East Kalimantan. We have to deal with a very rough condition where the roads are really hard to travel. And then we made a mistake. This is the don'ts is like you have to really prepare on the vehicles that you wanted to prepare. So don't underestimate that. So we did underestimate the field there. We thought that a van is going to be can really go through, but we have to use four-wheelers, the big trucks to go through the areas, or the motorcycles. But then you have to do the risk assessment again for using motorcycles, because Indonesians mostly don't wear helmets. And so that was the first thing that is come into my mind. But when I went into the site, it's kind of like a different avenue, because when I landed into the airport, I understand that the area was already being dominated by this specific company that we actually wanted to investigate, or we wanted to write. So at that time, I feel really intimidated because the airport is filled with their banners everywhere. So I feel like, oh, this is like a different kind of country, because we don't have that in Jakarta. The banners from the company everywhere. And then when you go out of the airport and then you go to the mining sites, there are a lot of blanks or plaques that saying, oh, this is the area belong to this PT, or this company, PT, this PT, this. So you have to be really careful and really observant about that. That's what the first thought I have. This is their area. I have to really be careful. And I don't really need to, be rushed into step outside and taking pictures. Just be mindful of what's happening in that area. And then the third one that we really consider is to find the local guide that is really familiar with the areas. This is really important, especially in Indonesia. If you wanted to do research or investigation, collaboration in you have Indonesian partners, please remind them to have a very good local guides. It doesn't have to be from the NGOs or local civil organizations, even though you can rely on them, but don't really depend on them, because they have their own agenda. And this is what we encountered. So this is also the don'ts. We don't really do due diligence on this local guide that we have. So what happened was, when we actually met the local people, the protesters, my colleague wanted to have a different kind of interview, but this local guide showed us, gave us this sources, and this sources was already there with the banner rejecting the company, which is we really shocked, because we thought that nobody really know about that. But he had a banner, and he asked us to take pictures and took videos of them handing out those banners of protests. And that's not something that we wanted to find. We just wanted to look at the facts and the factuals and their stories. So that's what happened. And on the don'ts is just the do's is, you really have to make sure that your local guide is someone you trusted, someone that really have a very good background. And then the one that's, if you're in trouble, make sure that he has a power. So for instance, in Kalimantan, there are a lot of indigenous peoples. Make sure that your local guide know the head of those indigenous peoples that you're visiting to. So you talk to them, you ask permission. You don't go and coming around saying, hey, we wanted to report. You have to use their language, and don't use the language we want to investigate. We wanted to ask you about the government. Sometimes they're really anti-government, or they're really afraid of the word government, especially when you're in the conflict situation with the government in mining areas, not just mining, but also palm oil and other extractive industries. So that's something that my experience of being reporting or actually in the field for coal mining at that time. And the last one is something that you have to do is actually assess the process post investigation or post reporting. This is something that we're miss because I did a mistake of using to contact the sources using my own number. So what happened was Ben was like looking at me, he's like, no, you don't do that. Yeah, I was like really like, oh shit, oh my God. Like, my number is like, I contacted the ones who's responsible on that, the ones that we investigated, and then eventually he did not come to us for the interview, but my number was with him, so I have to block him. It's just like, so don't do that. You have to have a spare number, because another possibilities is that the local villagers might want to contact you again for the follow-ups, like, what Ben mentioned about in his presentation, because they could like ask you, oh, this is what happened in this area, this is what happened, this company like this, the military doing like this. So make sure you have a spare cell phone numbers. Also because it's like a different signal in Jakarta compared to East Kalimantan and other countries. Different network would be meaning different kind of communication. So you have to have a spare communication. So that's the posting. And then the second one for the post, after you investigate or doing the field reporting, you have to really consider if they're safe for your sources. There are a lot of, this is not mining related, but we have cases where there's the latest one is about the pollution in Jakarta recently. This one is in Jakarta. This is not remote areas. This is really in Jakarta. So they interviewed this one person, gave the address, like really give them the address of these sources. And what happened after that, the stories got published, and this guy got harassed by the military because he was criticizing the coal power plants polluting Jakarta at that time. So this is just recently. So make sure you have to, make sure you consider on your sources, testimonies or interviews. Make sure that you tell them that they understand that this is going to be published. If they don't want to be published their names, you have to offer them other alternatives that would make your stories stronger. So that is something that you need to consider, because this is a question, because my colleagues were actually non-Indonesian. She is a foreigner, so he can go back to his country and nothing happened. But what happened is that the sources are still dealing with those conflicts. They still have to deal with the military, they still have to deal with the company, and it's not going to stop even if you're publishing your story. So be mindful of the sources. If they cannot talk publicly using their names, offer them something else. Or if you need this background, you can check for other safer sources, like from the NGOs, to back up their stories. And something that probably missing is like, I love to interview the ones who are not being reported. So mostly these people that was talking about mining extractions are all men. So you need to find someone who's not men, mostly women who are in the kitchen, because they know the reality, what's going on. But you need to approach them with the language that they understand. You don't approach them with saying that, oh, this is development about just transition. What do you think about it? This is the development for the country. What do you think about it? No, you can just ask them casually, what is, how your son getting to school? Because a lot of them getting affected from their, and that side, it was really hard to go to their school because the road is really, really broken down because of the trucks coming out. So how long your son have to go to the school? How long do you have to go to prepare your food? This because the mining is actually affecting their livelihood. So those are the questions that you wanted to ask. Those women usually the ones who know, because they're the ones who control the domestic lives, so they know that they're facts. So that's a very good angle or voices that you want to be talked about. So I think that's all.
Just a follow-up. Some of the mining areas look like prohibited zones where people are barred from going. How do you encounter such a situation in Indonesia, and how do you go around it?
Oh yeah, so the mining, when we got there, we have a very good strategy or tactic. So because Indonesia, when you go to East Kalimantan, it's an open pit mining. So when you go there, you can actually see the mining site in the side of the road. So what probably is the challenge is how to determine whose land belongs to this area. But if you just wanted to have like an illustration, or you wanted to see what it looks like, you can actually go in East Kalimantan. What we did at that time, the researcher already pinpoint the areas that we wanted to cover, right? So what we did was, luckily the driver was also very smart. So we stopped at the road, which is a very public road. You don't really actually have to climb the gates or anything, or just sneak out to the factories. So we did just stop in the middle of the road, and then he kind of like making, when the tires flat, pretending that the tire is flat. So he opened up the cap of the car. I don't use car, so I don't know the terms of it. So it's like pretending that the car break down. So one is taking care of the road. Like I have to make sure that no one is there to look at the road. And then the researcher and then the photographer just went out to a very safety zone outside of the road to take pictures. Luckily, we have drones at that time, so it was really, really a huge privilege for us to have drones at the time. It was before the pandemic, 2017, 2018. So it's kind of like new. I don't know. I'm really new with drone things. So excuse my my intellectual. So that's really beneficial for us. I don't know if you guys have drones, or you wanted to consider to have drones, but I think that's a good idea. And then you wanted to create some kind of scenarios. But this is only if you know that your mining site is something like an open pit, and you know the areas that you wanted to cover. So it's not like we're trespassing on anything. It's just in the middle of the road, and we made sure that the area is the land that was that land that owns by someone that we are investigating, by the company investigating. So that's how we do taking pictures, and then trying to get the whole scenery of what's the open pit mining at that time.
Thank you, and I like the way you knock on the gatekeepers, and also your tips on how to handle the local fixers to ensure that you get what you want. Now we move to Eric. Eric handles things from the editorial side, and he's able to identify the gaps and the deficiency in terms of capacity, and also bring out the areas that need to be focused or have been left out by journalists. So Eric, in your dealing with our reporters from the field here in Africa, what are the issues that you feel you realize need to be addressed to bring them to a level where they can do better stories? And on the supply chain from the mines to the factories, what do you think need to be emphasized on?
Okay, that's a lot. So let's start with some of the deficiencies, and we'll talk a little bit about the context of China, in part because here in South Africa and Southern Africa, China is the big player. One of the themes that you've heard a lot today is you have to have that baseline of knowledge in order to start, and it's a complex space. One of the other themes of this conference that we've heard too is that a lot of African newsrooms now are increasingly staffed by young journalists who are under enormous pressure doing 12, 14, 15 stories a day in digital newsrooms. And so there isn't a lot of time to get that knowledge. So what ends up happening is that the Western narratives from AP, Reuters, AFP tend to pass through and almost become the default. And the problem that you have now is that when it comes to China, those narratives that are coming from the West are not necessarily accurate or reflective of the narratives that are here. So, and this is the same issue in Indonesia as well. By the way, just one little quick note on Indonesia. So Indonesia is very important for African countries right now in the mining space because Indonesia is pioneering on the legislative side of things. So they were the first to make the nationalization of the ban on export of raw minerals. That model was followed by both Zimbabwe and now Namibia. Indonesia is the closest country right now to actually moving from mine to manufacturing in the entire supply chain in one developing country. It's never happened before, and Indonesia is leading the way. They are very close to getting an EV manufacturer. Tesla and Geely both thought they were going to be there, and then they weren't there, and then they were there, and then they weren't there, and now they're not there. But they're aggressively trying to get an EV manufacturer to be there. One of the things that we've seen in Indonesia, though, which is very interesting, and it's a cautionary tale about China here in Africa as well, is that just because you nationalize the exports of the minerals doesn't mean that it goes to locals to benefit. So the Chinese dominate the nickel mining industry in Indonesia. They also dominate the refining processes in Indonesia as well. And so the profits are all being captured by the Chinese and not necessarily being handed to local stakeholders. So something to think about. And we're seeing the same thing in Zimbabwe right now with Prospect Lithium, who's doing the refining. The profits are being captured by the Chinese and not by local stakeholders. So there's a lot of misunderstanding sometimes when we say Africans want to move up the value chain from just exporting raw materials. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to profit from that. So this is one of the areas that in your coverage you have to really start to differentiate who's profiting, who's owning, and what the rights are. Let's talk a little bit about China, just so we can get a little bit of a context here. Many people think that China is a major mining power in Africa. That is the assumption. Does anybody have a guess as to how much of Africa's mineral exports are controlled by the Chinese? Total mineral exports. Throw a number out. I'm not going to let you guys get away with saying nothing. How much? How much of Africa's exports go to China, are controlled by the Chinese? Let's have a guess. What do you think?
Rough guess.
Rough guess. Just a guess.
80%.
80%. Okay. Who's got another number? No, in percentage-wise. What percent of Africa's mineral exports go to China? The number is 7%. 7% of African mining is controlled by the Chinese. Anglo-American, one company, is 14%. Okay? Anglo-American's very big here. Glencore is almost 3 times as much, just Glencore. So here's a really important problem that we have. We need to put the Chinese and all the key players in the proper context. And when we talk about mining in critical minerals, the Chinese are very big in certain areas like the Congo and Zimbabwe. But when you look across the continent, especially here in South Africa, it's the European companies that are the strongest, the largest, and the most prominent. Ivanhoe from Canada, Glencore from Switzerland, Anglo-American, South Africa, UK. And oftentimes our attention goes to the Chinese because that is what the US is concerned about. So there's a disproportionate attention on the Chinese when in fact it was Glencore that was fined $1 billion by the Congolese government. Think about what it takes to get fined by the Congolese government for corruption. And Glencore got fined $1 billion, okay? So very important to get that context in the right place. Second thing that reporters oftentimes make a mistake about is they see China and Chinese to be the same thing. Oh, that's Chinese, okay? There's a huge difference between China, which is the state, government, state-owned enterprises, big companies, and Chinese independent actors. So let me take the Congo, for example, where you've got the big mining companies that account for the vast majority of the output of critical minerals and cobalt out of the Congo. But in the eastern Congo, South Kivu, North Kivu, in those provinces, most of that illegal mining is all done by independent actors that have nothing to do with the Chinese state. But yet what ends up happening in a lot of African mines, and the West does this as well, is they throw, oh, it's just the Chinese. And the illegal mining that's happening in Ghana, Nigeria, in Zambia, are all done by independent migrant actors that have nothing to do with the state, nothing to do with China, the government. And so don't conflate China and Chinese. There's a big difference between the two. We have to look at them separately. The last point on a do's and don'ts. We have a bureau in Jakarta as well, and we commission a lot of Indonesian mining stories. And what was coming back from a lot of these stories was Chinese contractor was contracted to build something in a community. And the people got upset because they were forcibly relocated. They were upset because there was environmental damage. And so the story was blame the Chinese. So I asked the reporters, I said, would the story be the same if it was a French company or a German company or a Japanese company doing that? And in many cases, they said, yes, it would be the same story. Well, that's not a Chinese story then. Then that helps us to figure out that the real story is actually in the failure of governance by the local government to enforce its own environmental regulations and its own labor laws and whatnot. So just because a Chinese actor or a foreign actor is involved doesn't make it their fault. In Africa in particular, we have failures of governance across the board. And again, we were talking about this in the previous presentation. Too often, it's blamed on the mining company, but actually the burden of accountability and responsibility is on the local government to enforce their own laws. And that's something that's very important in terms of where does the accountability stand in terms of shaping your story. So I'll leave it there for now.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for that informative information, and especially the role or the level in which China is involved in Africa, in the mineral sector, which to many of us would have thought it's a huge or a big player, but it's not, and that the clamor for value addition, which we thought is a way out to ensuring African countries benefit immensely from these resources, is vital, and only to realize that it does not always translate to more revenue to the countries involved. So that is very crucial. But if I may ask, normally reporters have got this challenge of getting information when it looks like the kind of whatever that is being asked will put the authorities to task in terms of being accountable. How do we handle that?
There's no simple answer there. As we just heard, it can be very dangerous reporting on these. I'll tell you, in Vietnam, where I live, journalists now are being sentenced to 8 to 10-year jail terms for writing about green alternative energy because the government has vested stakes in the coal industry. Here in South Africa, 100,000 jobs depend on the coal industry, and 100,000 more jobs depend on those. The ANC is not going to be happy being pushed into getting rid of those jobs. It's very dangerous to report on some of these things. And so going back to protecting your sources is one thing. We also regularly use aliases in our bylines. So we have a byline called Hanzhen, which is it's a Chinese name, and that's when we want to protect the journalist. And we just use, so there's no identification of the journalist, and we oftentimes will indicate that source names have been changed as well. And we're very transparent in the reporting to say at the bottom that the names have been changed for the protection of the individuals. We have standards where we keep the names and we vet them and we make sure that they're quality names and whatnot. Sometimes if you and your own agency can't do it, you can then work with another agency that can, if the story is important. And you can provide that information to another journalist that can report on that. But it is difficult, and there is no simple answer. And I'm not the kind of person who says that it's worth dying and getting killed for a story. It just isn't.
No story worth your life.
It is not. And no matter how noble it is, I know some people will say I would die for the story. No, I don't believe that. It's just not worth it. Principles are subject to circumstance. And so I think that you have to use caution. In Indonesia and in the DRC, reporting on critical minerals can be very deadly.
Thank you. Lastly, before I go to Julia, you have been keenly involved in the issue of capacity building. What would be the best way, because we have grantees here who really need to improve their skills, what is the best approach for upcoming African journalists to gain the right knowledge and ability or capabilities to cover these issues?
So capacity building.
Okay. I'm just saying.
Okay, wow, sorry about that. I was end of the day. I need my coffee. So I thought I spoke too much. Time to move on. Capacity building.
Yes.
So capacity building is super, super important. And the difficulty is that it's not always accessible. And I'm not one of these people that, that the white savior comes in to teach Africans how to do everything. I think that is a mantra that's been set up quite a bit. And I think we kind of need to break that model a little bit. So a couple different things. One is online, there are amazing resources. It is unbelievable how much is available online if you actually do some searches. One of the other things that I've noticed is most of you guys are too old to do this, okay? But here's what the kids do, okay? And I'm not joking. Every single week, I get 19 and 20 and 21-year-olds who just say, I listen to your podcast. I love what you say. Can I take 20 minutes of your time and talk to you? It's incredible how they have no fear. And by the way, it's a universal thing. This happens from Africans, from Chinese, from Americans. These kids have no fear of calling up somebody that they follow and listen to and like and just say, can I talk to you? And you know what happens? Most people say, yeah, sure. So if there's somebody that you like and you admire, a reporter, a blogger, an influencer, take the chance just to email them up and say, can I borrow 10 minutes of your time, 20 minutes of your time? Most people will say they're flattered by it and they would love to work with you and to talk with you. And you'd be amazed at how you can open doors and learn things just from doing that. The kids have no fear at all and no shame whatsoever in just being like, hi, I like you, I want to talk to you. And I think it's one of the best things about what Gen Z is doing these days, and I recommend that you guys follow that. So just call people up, and you'll get so much access to great talent and great insights for doing that. So it's a very useful tip.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. Now to Julia. The whole story starts with going to the mines, and that's where the value chain begins. So as a journalist who is covering these things in South Africa, what are the protocols that one need to first of all consider?
Isn't work.
You're good.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Like everyone said, I'm a journalist from South Africa with the Daily Maverick, and yeah, it's an honor to be on this panel with such experienced editors and journalists. I've been a journalist for about 3 years, and I honestly was just smiling because I did exactly that. I am 25 and I just have the audacity to just call people way smarter than me and tell them to explain everything. But especially with environmental journalism, it definitely works because often if you email or call a professor or a scientist or an engineer, they're actually desperate to speak to you for like 2 hours because they spent their whole life researching this, and then 2 people will read their like life's work. So they want to talk about it and they want more people to read it. So it's really important for you to be able to put that complex science and information into layman's terms for readers. And yeah, usually if you frame it like that, they'll be happy to chat to you. Yeah, I feel like I've done a whole nother degree in the past 3 years, or a whole nother like 4 degrees, just because of how much I've learned. So I just wanted to say that. And then, yeah, so I'm an environmental journalist. I do cover a lot about the energy transition, and I do talk about critical minerals because obviously a lot of those minerals are needed for renewable energy technology, electric vehicles, that sort of thing. And then also the environmental destruction that mining and then the lack of rehabilitation has in South Africa, but I do not have a lot of experience with critical minerals. So I spoke to some of my colleagues who have, and these are senior journalists who've been reporting for like 30 years. And in terms of safety protocols, they said if you're going to a mine, you have to get permission from the company if you're going to go inside. And when you go with the company, they'll provide the safety gear. So it'll be like a safety hat with a lamp and an oxygen mask and goggles and earplugs. And you have to follow all of their instructions and not wander off anywhere. And apparently you also have to do a breathalyzer test. And a lot of, another reporter I asked, like that came up a lot when I asked about safety is about what's going on outside the mine. So a lot of miners' rights in South Africa have not been met. So there might be like a strike or a protest going on. So if that's the case, that safety is really important. And I agree with Eric, your life is never worth a story. So in a tense situation, like for example, I don't know if you guys know about the Marikana strikes that happened a few years ago with some miners protesting for their rights, and many of them were shot by the police. And I know some journalists who covered that. You obviously have to be very cautious, and journalists are usually provided with bulletproof vests and helmets in those situations. But if you are a new journalist, you should definitely go with another journalist who has experience. Like if you're in a situation like that, you shouldn't go by yourself. And then, like I said, if you're going into the mine, you'd have to have permission from the company, and they would provide the gear with you. I have been to quite a few power stations, and yeah, they're pretty strict about the equipment and following the rules. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Now, looking at the Daily Maverick, and these are things you cover, what are the main stories revolving around mining that are likely to be found on your pages?
Well, sorry, I was really loud. A lot of it is around coal mining. Like Eric said, South Africa is, most of our energy comes from coal. So about 88% of our electricity that's produced is from the coal sector. So a lot of our reporting is around that, not just the fact that people are, mining for coal, or there's power plants that use coal to produce electricity, but I'm sure you guys have all experienced it. If you've been here for a few days, we obviously have load shedding. So our coal fleet is our worst performing fleet, and a lot of that is to do with lack of maintenance, corruption and sabotage at the plants. So Eric was saying, it would be it's hard to convince government and communities to transition because there's so many people reliant on jobs, which is true, but I feel like our government uses that as a scapegoat to hide behind the fact that they're actually benefiting behind closed doors from things like mafias and cartels inside the coal sector. It's actually crazy. Like, you can't believe it until it's so crazy that it almost has to be true. Like, you can't make this stuff up. People will, stop coal trucks on the way to mines and, you know, like rob them. People will purposefully break like boilers at a plant so their friend can come and fix it. And then money that's meant to go towards this will like be diverted, like millions and millions of rands will be diverted into like one person's pocket. So there's a lot of vested interest in terms of money. Like a lot of our politicians or people who have connections to our politicians are making a lot of money from that. So yeah, that would be the main thing. And then, yeah, I think South Africa, like a lot of African countries, has like a wealth of resources when it comes to critical minerals. And historically, like going all the way back to colonization, I think like Africa has all the resources, but for some reason, like Eric was saying, Europe is the one benefiting from it. And that's still happening today. So I've reported on diamond mining before, which is obviously like a luxury mineral. But yeah, I think it's really interesting to speak to communities on the ground as well as speaking to companies and obviously the government about the regulations. Like I really agreed with what you said about whenever you're writing a story, if you're going to go into a community, you need to know someone in the community who is open to speaking to you, because if you have that relationship or that they'll bring you into the community. Because if you just kind of like walk in there, I mean, I've had to do that before, and like sometimes it works out, but you know, it's a lot easier if you know someone and then they can introduce you to like their neighbors and you know, just tell you their day-to-day struggles. Like I really liked what you said about speaking to women who have like domestic experiences. So yeah, that's, I would say, but yeah, a lot of it is to do with coal mining. Obviously, a lot of it is to do with gold mining. I mean, you guys are in like the city of gold is what Joburg's nickname is, and it's like this is why Joburg exists. I think it's like the biggest city in the world that isn't close to any main water source, and the reason that Joburg exists is because there was gold mining here, and that's why everyone moved here. But yeah, I think the focus has shifted more lately to coal. But yeah, diamond mining is also still pretty big. And a lot of that that I report on is the environmental damage, because our Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, it's complicated because our Department of Environment is separate to our Department of Mineral Resources. So there's often a clash of the Department of Mineral Resources will allow mining companies to have projects that are detrimental to really important like biodiversity hotspots or whatever. But then if you have an issue with that, you have to apply with the Department of Environment. And then the Department of Environment has to go to the Department of, the government's working in silos, and it makes everything take so long, and it gives the mining companies more time to continue mining, and there's just a cumulative effect. And yeah, like we can't afford to have that. But yeah, it's like what Eric was saying, you need to hold those governments who are giving, because you can't just mine without permission from the government. So you have to like say to the government, why would you allow this based on our constitution and all this stuff. So yeah, that was quite long-winded, but I think it's important.
Thank you very much, Julia. Now we open space for questions to the three panelists. And we begin from the other end, then Timwan, the con. Okay. Sorry.
My question goes to Julia. I'm curious, when you went to these coal plants, which ones did you visit?
So I have to really think about this. I've been to Coburg, I've been to Grootfontein, and there's one other one that I went to. I'm completely blanking on it. I'm sorry. I've been to, I've been to two in Mpumalanga and one in the Free State. Grootfontein is in the Free State, I think, and then Coburg, which is one of the newer ones, and then one other. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting about it. But yeah, the one that I went to Coburg, you could see the actual mine where they mine the coal was just like down the road, and then I was visiting the actual power plant where they, turn like burning the coal into electricity, and that's one of the newer power plants, which was started to be built in 2008, and they still have not finished building it. that's ridiculous. It's over 15 years later, because what happened to all that money while they were building it is like a huge reason why also we have load shedding and we have this issue. So yeah, that's where I went.
Okay, I'm asking because I'm just trying to establish from the reporting or the research that you guys did you get any indication on when we are going to move away from those plants? Because some of the major plants have been failing for the past, 6 months? And that's why we've been having like 6 to 8 hours of load shedding. And some were supposed to be maintained 25 years ago.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So South Africa has something called the Integrated Resource Plan, which is a plan that sets out the energy mix and like the plan for decommissioning and adding new power. So the last time that plan came out was 2019, and it had a plan of which plants specifically they were going to decommission, which coal plants and which year, and how much renewable energy and coal and gas they were going to add. That plan, a lot of experts think is incredibly out of date, and it doesn't have enough emphasis on renewable energy. I think there's like 40% new renewable energy in there. But even though that plan is inadequate, even though, so there's not enough space for renewables in that plan, but even so, we haven't even met the targets on that plan, which is not good. And then additionally, in the past few months, because load shedding has gotten so much worse this year, our Minister of Electricity has decided to delay the decommissioning of a lot of our coal plants because he feels that we don't have the capacity to take units off the grid when we're going through load shedding. But the problem with that is that's really, really expensive because a lot of these plants were built in like the 60s and 70s, and they're literally crumbling. Their maintenance is terrible, which is why we have so much load shedding already. And then also the thing is, when you keep those plants alive, we won't meet our emission standards. So it's quite complicated, but South Africa's minimum emission standards, which is it's the minimum amount that we're allowed to emit of like harmful emissions like sulfur dioxide and carbon dioxide and stuff. They're inadequate, but they've had to be updated to meet standards, but they're literally really terrible. They're worse than China's standards. They're worse than the world average. But anyway, if you carry on with those coal plants like the minister wants to do, we're not going to meet those standards. So environmental, economic problems with that. We just really need to ramp up our renewable energy building capacity. Right now, of actual electricity, not build capacity of actually that's going into the grid, I think there's about 6% or like 2,000 megawatts of renewables. Yeah, which is not obviously close enough because we have so much renewable potential. But yeah, it's all laid out. It's called the Integrated Resource Plan, and you can research it. Last came out in 2019, and a lot of people have been calling for an update. The Greater Mantashe, the Minister of Renewable Resources and Energy, indicated a new one is coming out at the end of last year. He said that, but we still haven't seen one.
Temwan.
Okay, my question can be answered by any one of the three panelists. Was there a time when you embarked on an investigation and it was not successful? Is there something that you can share with us? What went wrong and what would you have done right? Or was there a time when you embarked on an investigation and you quickly noticed that it could have collapsed? How did you overcome the barriers so that it ended up being successful? Thank you.
Well, I'm not gonna say collapse, but it does give us a bit of a different point of view because of what we found in the field at that time, and it was really shocking. So when we went to this to do this coal mining story, because I was there to translate with the local people there, and then he was complaining. Basically, the method that was being used by the company at that time was trying to pitch the families together, between families, the uncles, and then this young man that is refusing to sell his lands to the companies. I knew that this company is actually a coal mining, but the company was basically obtaining a different kind of permit, palm oil permit, but basically underneath it is also coal mining. So what happened was when we interviewed him and then saying that, oh, my uncle is persistent that we have to clear the lands, declare the areas and sold this land to this company. And then why do you say that? Why do you think that the uncle? Because he snuck out and then stole the land certificate from us, and then he asked us to sign. Okay, can you show us this agreement that you signed? And then I really actually read it, and then it was saying that the land and then the house and actually the whole land is actually not theirs anymore. But the young man is persistent that this is still their lands. Their uncle is just stealing the certificate. And then I said, "Did you read this certificate?" And then he said, "No. Why? I cannot read." "But you signed it." "Yes, because my uncle. I trust my uncle." "But you don't know what it's in it." "Yes, because I cannot read." So that's kind of like giving you, wow. So that's it's not collapsing, but it's giving you that kind of like perspective of how really dangerous it is and how it's really complicated in the field of trying to kind of like unravel this complicated issues because of what happened. And what happened is all the time is that the people or the communities, the local communities are being pitched against families, against each other. And this is a really good example. I'm not really sure if I'm not in charge of the writing on that one, but it's kind of like giving him the evidence that this person actually cannot read, but he signed it. And it's kind of like providing a very legal difficulties. So that is something that you need to also to prepare on the field, all those that shocking elements that you might find, and then will lead you to maybe you have to change your lead. But again, if that happened, if you have to change it, failing or not, you have to discuss this with the editor. Is this something that is worth it to change it? Is this something or failure? What I think about is when that time is really it's kind of like mind-blowing because these people cannot read, and I just realized it because I'm from Jakarta, city girl. I did not know that the issue is very complex, especially on mining at that time. So I didn't really consider it as a failure. But the second one is probably not connected with mining. I did a story about deforestation long way before this coal mining stories, and the prime source that I have to interview is a general officer, police officer, and he did not want to be interviewed because it links to the former vice president at that time. He had to stop investigation of 13 companies illegal logging at that time in 2011, I think. So what happened was the story did collapse at that time. But what happened was I have to find another angle and then find another source that's not related to the general police, but I have to include him. My effort that's saying that I have already approached this person for interview, but I cannot reach him for comment. So I have to kind of like pivot to the stories using the experts who's personally investigating the illegal logging cases. So I have to change my subject into him. Instead of the police, even though my original plan was actually the police because he's the one who stopped the investigation for the 13 companies. That's for me.
Just one tip that I've picked up along the way that I find very useful is that one of the dangers of any investigation is that the editor has an assumption as to what the story is about. And the reporter has an assumption as to what the story is about, and then you go and find and confirm that assumption. And there's a confirmation bias that often occurs. And what I've started doing as an editor now, managing reporters, in order to challenge that, is I will send the pitch to an outside expert saying, what do you think? Get in, not in my own organization. And then as the first drafts start coming in on the stories, I'm sending it to other experts or other people in the newsroom so that there's other eyes beyond my own and the reporters are looking at it. This helps prevent the stories from collapsing. It also helps prevent confirmation bias. Confirmation bias today is really, really dangerous and easy because we live in our little Facebook filter bubbles, right? So we assume X or Y or Z, and then you get a reporter saying, I want you to go and look at X and Y and Z. And you get a story back that says X, Y, and Z. But really the story is X, Y, and G. So bringing in those outside voices to make sure you're going in the right direction is really helpful before you get to publication. I've found that to work very, very well. And if you're a reporter, not an editor, ask your editor to do that. And it will really help to do that.